In your other book that I loved, called Believe Me, The Evangelical Road to Donald Trump, you go back in history and kind of share the historical path that led to 80% of white evangelicals, and I know there's debate about that number, but
Yeah.
it's close enough, white evangelicals voting for Donald Trump. Now, one of my reactions to that is it's not necessarily new. I mean, white evangelicals have been voting Republican in high numbers since Ronald Reagan, for sure, since the first President Bush. So when did evangelicals start becoming identified with the Republican Party? Is that something that has been true for decades, or is that relatively recent?
Yeah, again, this goes back to sort of our earlier conversation. I think there becomes this alliance between the GOP and conservative evangelicals, at least. It really begins with Ronald Reagan. Again, there's a deep history here. Jimmy Carter in 1976, a Democrat, openly declared himself to be a born-again Christian. I mean, and many evangelical Christians love this. They voted for him, right? They significant numbers of evangelicals voted Democratic in 1976. Jimmy Carter let them down on a variety of fronts. One, he was unwilling to fight the culture war over abortion. He personally opposed abortion, but he defended Roe versus Wade, right, the right of a woman to choose. He also was willing to support a Supreme Court ruling that made white academies in the South, these are Christian schools in the South, as well as a university, Bob Jones University, to desegregate or else lose tax-exempt status. Well, this was viewed as Jimmy Carter kind of working with the levers of big government, right, to intrude in the religious beliefs of people who wanted to segregate. So Ronald Reagan offered, Carter also called people to sacrifice, right, during the energy crisis. And most evangelicals did not want to do that. Ronald Reagan offered freedom. He offered more liberty. He offered no big government interfering, right? He came just short of saying, government shouldn't even interfere in segregated academies. He launched his campaign in 1980 in a town in Mississippi, the name's escaping me right now, which had experienced multiple deaths of Black civil rights people. The cues were all there. And then Reagan came during the campaign to a gathering in Dallas of the National Religious Broadcasters, which was sponsored by leading lights within the conservative evangelical movement like Jerry Falwell, D. James Kennedy, James Robeson, and others, and essentially said, I can't endorse you, or I'm sorry, you can't endorse me, but I endorse you. And that sort of began the relationship with the GOP. And this relation, George H.W. Bush did not necessarily, he wasn't too keen on working closely with evangelicals, although evangelicals voted for him. And then the anti-liberal or Christian right really was solidified in the 1990s in opposition to Bill Clinton. And then George W. Bush, right? A self-professed born-again Christian. So it's been going on since the 80s. What's interesting to me about all of this is, the Christian right in the 70s and late 70s and early 80s with this Reagan era, they developed a political playbook, I call it, right? The political playbook went something like this, and all of your listeners are aware of it, right? Vote for the right president who will appoint the right Supreme Court justices, vote for the senators who will confirm those justices, will overturn Roe versus Wade, will protect religious liberty. Later on, we'll use the courts to fight for marriage. All of these things, and there were some wins and some losses along the way. But that political playbook, right, how a Christian should engage in politics, was always tied, until 2016, was always tied to what most white evangelicals believed was a person of character. So whatever one thinks of Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Bob Dole, George W. Bush, John McCain, Mitt Romney, right? These were the GOP candidates, right? Whenever you think about these men, white evangelicals believe they were men of character, right? Who upheld the institutions of the office. They were moral people. I would say most evangelicals, even if they voted for Donald Trump, would have said that he was not a man of character, at least someone who reflected their faith and their beliefs.
So this is where you see the switch happening. I mean, as a historian, you're looking back, if I understand you right, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think what you're saying is that evangelical Christians and Republicans joined together in the 80s. But evangelical Christians could tell themselves, we're voting for people of character. Now, with Donald Trump, now all of a sudden, several, what you would end up calling court evangelicals in your book, they flipped. And you're suggesting that what they revealed is that they were really about the power, that they wanted to be in the room kind of where it happened. Their willingness to jump in bed with the president without the character of the previous candidates said something about themselves.
Yeah, put it this way, right? In 2016, for the first time since the 70s, the playbook and the candidate were at odds. And evangelicals chose the playbook, which is a playbook driven by three things I argued, and believe me: fear of change, the pursuit of power, which you just described very nicely, and what we talked about earlier, this kind of MAGA mentality, right? This nostalgic longing for, and this goes back to the beginning of our podcast, right? Our interview here, that nostalgic longing for a return to a Christian America.